So,
Yeah.
all right, so we're going to continue now. We just started the Mishnah on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to repeat the Mishnah. It's a fascinating study here that we're about to start, as is the entire Gemara, but we move forward. So the Gemara, the Mishnah says on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, Omer l'shnayim. If a person approaches two people and he says, Gozalti le'echad mikem moneh, I stole from one of you a money, $100, let's say. Ve'eni yedea eze mikem, but I don't know which one of you. So he's approaching them and he says, I know I owe one of the two of you $100. Oh, aviv shel echad mikem hifked li moneh. One of your fathers, one of the two of yours fathers, gave me a pikadon to hold of $100. Ve'eni yedea ezehu, and I don't remember which one. Says the Mishnah, Nosen Lazem Moneh Velazem Moneh. Why? Shahoda b'pnei atzma. Because he volunteered, he has to give each 100. Now let's look at Rashi. Rashi says Shahoda b'pnei atzma ho v'hoda mipi atzmo. He voluntarily came to them and he told them that he owes money. Gemara mafarish tama mahi, and it's a little bit complicated. So the Rashi says, let's wait for the Gemara to understand why in this particular case he has to give each one a money. But nevertheless, he owes each one a money, and he has to pay. Now, there is a second and third case in the Mishnah, and it's going to be important to understand because they contradict each other. Says the Mishnah Vayter, if two people came to Reuven, Shimon and Levi came to Reuven, and they gave him a pikadon, meaning, like a shemachinam, you can hold for me money, but one gave 100, one gave 200. Each one says, no, I gave you the 200. So l'chaira, what does this man do? Because clearly he doesn't have 400, he has only 300. What does he do? Says the Mishnah, Nosen l'zem moneh, v'lezem moneh. He gives each one 100. And this concept of Shiur Eliyah we've had before, but basically he gives each one 100, and then the third 100 he has to hold for Eliyah Navi because he can't answer it. Amar Rabbi Yossi, comes Rabbi Yossi, who we know is machmir because we've seen time and again that Rabbi Yossi is more machmir than, say, the Tanakama or the other Tanoim. In K, mahifsa de Ramai. If you're going to give each one 100 and then let 100 lie for Eliyah Navi, then the one person who only gave 100 has no loss. What's his incentive? Why should he even try to sort of negotiate or make something else happen? He got his 100 back. So he's looking at it from the perspective, mahifsa de Ramai, there'll never be closure because the guy who got the 100 is satisfied. What moves him to come back and say, no, that's it, I only gave 100 or whatever? The whole thing has to be Henfe Eliyah Navi. Now everybody's got a stake in the game, and the one who is losing, who is the untruthful one, has to make a decision. Do I come forward and say, no, I only got 100, got mine, at least I'm whole? Or does he basically just fall into this vacuum and he loses the 100 until Eliyah Navi comes as well? So the second case of the Mishnah, there is no fault on the part of the Nifka, the one who's holding it. In the first case of the Mishnah, where the first fellow said, I owe you, I stole 100, but I don't know from whom, the Mishnah tells us that he's achroi. He has to pay back each one 100, which means he has to take 100 out of his pocket, which clearly he doesn't owe, but now he has to pay it. In the second case of the Mishnah, we're saying no. If it's an odd amount, 100 and 200, at most he has to give back 200. And the third 100 is Yovel Shel Eliyahu, or contra Rabbi Yossi, nothing goes back. So we can compare and contrast the two cases, why in the first case he's chayiv to give more than he got, and in the second case he doesn't have to give back more than he got. In fact, he can give back less than he got because of the concept of Yovash Eliyah. Okay,
Rabbi,
yes,
Rabbi, I'm sure the Gemara will talk about this, but I find it interesting. In the first case in the Gemara, in the Mishnah equates a thief who's not sure who he stole from with a custodian who's not sure who left something with him. In other words, it seems to be two very different categories of people, and yet they're equated the same in terms of how they're treated.
so that's an excellent question, because that will touch exactly on one phase. In one phase, that's how the Gemara looks at it. In one phase is, how do you compare a ganef to a pekadon? And that's a very valid point. Just keep in mind, though, that a shomer who's negligent also has to pay. So as you're thinking about that and saying, yeah, he's a ganef, he of course should pay. He's a good guy, he was a pekadon. But think about the fact that in the pekadon arena, there could be carelessness. And if there's carelessness, a shomer chinim is chayiv to pay. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but you have to think about it and say, maybe he's not totally exonerated. Maybe he should have been better in looking at who gave him the money, l'chaira. I mean, that's a question. So all of this the Gemara will discuss, but since you raise it, I just want to raise back and say, you're right, but also think about it in a larger picture, is that it's possible that someone who is a shomer also didn't do 100% right.
But
thank you.
At the same time, though, I think Yael has a point, though, because, and I think the Mishnah really does reflect it, because we're saying that the Goslin is effectively paying double, because he's got to pay both.
Right.
Whereas we're not saying that the other one should give 200 to both, or at least not in the first explanation here. So we're saying 100, and hold 100. His total amount due is the same as what he lost. It's not, or it's a step below where the Goslin is.
Right, but the question should be, why doesn't he pay 200? Why, in other words, if he got 100 and 200, and he should have, let's just say, for argument's sake, right now, that is the discussion of the Gemara, he should know better that this guy gave him 100, this guy gave him 200. He's going to cheat someone. Why does he not have to pay everything back, just like in the first case where he clearly didn't steal 200, but he has to pay 200? Here, did he do something so wrong that by giving back 100 and 100 and holding 100, he is withholding 100 to somebody, and he should be penalized to give each one back that second 100 regardless, just as in the first case where he has to give back that extra 100, which he clearly doesn't owe. I mean, I'm hypothesizing this only because once you ask the question, which Yale did, how can you compare the two, which is a valid question, I'm just going one step further and saying, maybe you can compare, maybe you can't. But if you can't say that they're on all fours, they're exactly right, then at least let's look at the parallel. In one case, he gives back double, and another case, he gives back less than double. Why should he give back less than double? Let at least him be giving back as much whole as in the first case. Again, these are all will be answered very shortly, but just in terms of thinking about it, you raise a good question, Menashe, and say, yeah, but it's a different thing. But the question is, why is it different? Why in the second case should he not be held to the same standard as in the first case? You don't know, pay up. Okay, it's your mistake. You should have known who was the 100, one was the 200. We have a time on him. Why don't you know? You held the pekadon. And the Gemara is going to answer that, but I'm just saying, once you start thinking about it, then these two cases don't sort of fit together. So Rabbi, one more case which is a little bit similar, and then we'll go into the Gemara to understand.
Rabbi, can I go back and ask a fundamental question? Why are these two cases in both cases linked? Why aren't they viewed as separate cases? It's either or. Why doesn't each case have to stand on its own? I owe you or you. Each person has to show proof, so they have to make the case. Why are they linked? In the case where you apportion an amount, you pay, in the opinions 100, And the
Well,
other one, why are they linked
are you
together?
talking about the first case of the Mishnah or the second case?
Well, I
The-
don't
the Gamut-
understand
the Gamut
why
case? The
any
Gamut
of them
case
are
or
linked
not?
together, because in the case where two people are contending that they're owed $100,
Yeah,
I don't
alright.
understand.
Yeah,
I
just
don't
put it in the
understand
refrigerator,
why
okay?
each case doesn't stand on
Yeah.
its own. Why are
Put the
they
bread and the butter in the
considered together?
refrigerator.
No. Michael, the first case is a case where the man voluntarily goes to two people and said, you know what, I have this on my conscience. I know that I stole, but I don't know from whom I stole. So that's one case. The second case is not where he says, I stole. They came to him and Reuven came and said, I'd like to collect my $200 that I left to you. And Shimon says, I'd like to collect my $200 that I left to you. And then the Nifgad, let's say it's Levi, says, wait a minute, I don't have $400. I have $300. One of you gave me one of you gave me two. So the first case, he is volunteering that he owes money, and we're penalizing him and saying that you have to pay to each of them. In the second case, he isn't volunteering anything. They came to him and they said, okay, we want to collect our money. And you owe me 200. And he says, okay. And then the other guy is standing there and says, no, you owe me 200. And there, there's $300 on the table. So what's he going to do? Pay $300 to two guys, each of whom want $200. So the second case is totally different. So now, what is the question?
So let's take each of them separately. In the first case, I owe one of you $100.
Yes.
You don't say to get, in his mind, he says it's one of them. I can't remember who it is. Wouldn't he go to the first person and say, do I have, do you, I stole $100, and ask the circumstances instead of lumping them together, as opposed to saying, I know it's on him to say, I can't remember who it is, but it has to be, you don't go to them together, you go to them sequentially, right?
No. According to the Mishnah, he went to two people. He saw two people standing by the shulchan in the shul, and he reminds himself and he says, guys, I know that
Okay.
I took $100 from one of you, or one of your fathers gave me $100 to hold, but I have no memory of the circumstances, but I know I owe it. In other words, he can't help
Okay.
define who the right person is. It's up to them to help define who the right person is. And they're saying, what do you want from us? I mean, you stole from us, give it back. Our father gave you money, give it back. So in other words, they are not timing to him. They have no time to him. He is voluntarily saying, I owe you money, but I can't figure it out. And you guys have to help me. And they say, we can't help you. We don't know what our father did. I mean, we know, yeah, he mentioned that he made a loan or whatever. But so in other words, the whole responsibility falls on
him.
on the
Okay.
gospel.
So I'm sorry, I missed the
So the whole
togetherness.
now in the
But
second,
in the other case, each case is a different case. Each one has I have $300 and one of you is 200 and the other is 100. Doesn't each person have to make their case in terms of, if one says 200 and one says 100, or one says 200, the other says 200, and he has 300, doesn't each have to make their case as to how they have it?
yeah, unfortunately, there's no star, there's no receipt. In other words, this thing was all done verbally. They came together. Okay, there's two buddies, and they said, you know what, we're going on a trip, we're going on a hunting expedition, we have money in our pocket, we don't want to carry money with us into the forest, let's just give it to Reuven here to hold. So the two of them take out the money and they give it to Reuven to hold. There's nothing formal here. They just gave him the money and they said, here. And the question now will be, so the cat is out of the bag. The question is there an achrayus on Reuven to know which of the two gave him the money? Because between the two of them, they just shoved $300 in his face, and that was it. But they did it together, not separately. They did it
Okay,
together.
that's what I didn't understand.
So
Okay,
now
thank you.
Reuven says, sure, I'll hold the money, but he didn't pay attention, and he has $300. Now, when they come back, he can't figure out who gave him the one and who gave him the two. So says the Mishnah, he doesn't have a responsibility to have known, and we'll see in a minute why. He has no responsibility to have known, to have given receipts, to have said, you gave me two, you gave me one. So under that circumstance, he can take no responsibility and give them each 100 and leave 100, or contra Rabbi Yossi, nothing.
Why doesn't he give both to both of them the $300 and say, here, you two are the ones that gave
Okay,
it, figure it out yourself.
Okay, so David, that's an option we'll get to. That is an option we'll get to, right? That the Gemara is going to go into this in great detail, but in the Mishnah, it's simply a question of what do I do? You're right. There are other options. The Mishnah is just saying, prima facie, on its surface, you, the recipient of the money to hold, have no obligation to do more than return what you've got. Either return 100 and keep one for Elio, or according to Rabbi Yossi, return nothing and let the whole thing go to Elio. So we're still in the rudimentary phase. What you're saying is correct, David, but we're in the rudimentary phase. We're going to get to how we arrive at that possibility in just a minute.
I have one other question. Wait, I just want to ask, when they say it goes, you put it away until Eliyahu comes. Now, they've been doing this since the Amoraim. Now, it's 5,000 years or something.
Right.
Let's say it's going to be
less.
another
It's
1,000 years.
3,000 years. Okay.
So what do they, at that point, do they go before a Bestin again? I mean, what is the procedure?
No. The presumption is, again, it's hard to understand this in real terms, but the presumption is that this money now lies somewhere in Pumbedisa, who knows where, and when Eliyahu comes, he will convene a Besdin, right? Eliyahu will convene a Besdin, and he will give psak to all of the questions, the unanswered questions of who owes who money. Again, this is a concept. It's hard for us to really understand what this really means, but so this money is lying somewhere waiting for a tshuva from the dayan, who the dayan being Eliyahu Hanavi. So now, if in the intervening years there is some proof that shows who's the real owner, you're allowed to dispense with it and not wait for Eliyahu. But that only depends on whether or not something is revealed over the course of time to suggest, now we know the answer. Now we know who the right guy is. But assuming we don't, there is pockets of money all over the world. Theoretically, it's there. And Eliyahu Navi will convene this Besdin, and he will make he'll make a decision. You owe him, whatever it happens to be. So it's
one more point. So I think part of the problem, I think maybe we hit Yale, me, and some of the others here, is that often with the Mishnah, you'll have two cases that differ in one key point.
Right.
But here we've got two cases that differ in multiple key points. One is a Goslin, one who is somebody who was legitimate. Right. One is where it's one person supposed to get the money and we don't know which one. Here it's two people. We know they're both supposed to get money in different amounts. And so there's like multiple differences between these cases. Correct. Which makes it really confusing.
Correct. It's a web that has a lot of different pieces to it. And we're going to try to untangle all the pieces. And in one or two terutzim, we're going to be able to distinguish all of them. But the havamina of the Mishnah is, the havamina by putting them together, is you have these cases that don't stand together. And you're right. Once you dig in, it's pretty clear why they don't stand together. But the Mishnah, at least in offering us the case, is saying, how do you reconcile one with the other? So if Yale hadn't jumped in and said, hey, but one case is a Goslin and one case is not, then I wouldn't be talking about Goslin now. I'd simply be talking about a case of where one guy has to pay out of his pocket, and the second case, he doesn't have to pay out of his pocket. Why is that? We now know the answer, because at least in part one is a Goslin. But I'm just saying, this is how the Mishnah works. The Mishnah will throw out the cases and say, how do you reconcile? Then the Gemara comes back. Now, at the time of the Mishnah, Tanoim were learning this, you could ask the kasha, don't they know better? Don't the Tanoim know better that a Goslin is not the same as a regular guy? Why are they comparing? That's another kasha. I mean, why at the time they were mulling this over and not themselves coming to an immediate conclusion and saying, okay, we answered it, let's go weiter. I mean, I can't answer that. But at the same time, the Tanoim are trying to get to the root cause because they want to tell us something. They want to tell us something important, and that something will come out just in a couple of minutes. So let's just finish the Mishnah, because there's one more case in the Mishnah, which is similar to the second case. The Shnei Kalim. If you had two Kalim, Echad Yafamon, and one is worth 100, Echad Yafad Olet, and one is worth 1,000. Zeh Zuz. Zeoma Yafer Shali, Vezema Yafer Shali. Nosnos Akotten Echad Mehem. Here the Mishnah is just giving us logistics. You give the cotton to one of them. Okay, so the cotton gets a whole vessel worth 100. What do you do with a vessel worth 1,000? What do you break it up and give them 1/10? You have to give the worth of the cotton $100 to the sheni, meaning presumably you sell it, right? Presumably. So the second case winds up being the same result as the first case, as the third to the second, except that the Mishnah is just telling us what are the logistics. What do you do to make it whole? So more or less, you're trying to give each one 100. You give one the full keli, which is 100, and the other, which we know it's not literal. You don't break it. You have to sell it and give him $100 worth of the kli. So Rashi says, little cotton. In other words, so they gave it to him. They went out hunting. They went out for 3 days. They came back. They had enough time to forget everything, and they said, "Okay, can I have my 200?" And the other guy says, "Can I have my 200?" He says, "Wait a minute. There's not two 200s. There's 100 and a 200." So in other words, they gave it to him, and then they left. My hifsed Ramai in Cain. Lo yoda la'olam al ha'emes will never know the truth, because the Ramai will never admit that he is cheating, right? So interesting. Rashi says yishbarenu, you break it and give him, you give him. Okay, but that's not the way we do things. You don't take $100 bill and tear it into 10 pieces and give him 1/10 and say, here's your $10. So in all of Torah, we know ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein. So Rashi explains there, and all the Mefarshim, that it means shavet. So it's curious that Rashi even uses this word here, yishbarenu, because Rashi clearly in the Torah never means ayin tachas ayin means you take out his eye. He always, in Rashi, says it means the money equivalent. Yet here he uses the word yishbarenu. You got to break the chayfetz and give him 10. So it's a little bit odd why Rashi would use that word here and not immediately say shavet meyazuz. Anyway, just a thought as to what Rashi's thinking is when he uses the word yishbarenu, because usually Rashi is right on the mark, and here he's telling us you break it. And we know as a practical matter, we don't do that. Okay, so now we have 3 cases. Let's just say there's 2 for our purposes. And we've already discussed a lot of the potential terutzim. So now let's get to the kashas, because we skipped over the questions and we gave svaras. So now the Gemara has a seder how it wants to analyze this Mishnah. It's very interesting. Zak the Gemara, Alma misfeka mafkina mamona. So we see that from a suffix, you do extract money. V'lo amrinan uka mamona b'cheskes mari. We have a klal in Shas that uka mamona b'cheskes mari means that the status quo is usually how we look at things. Who has the money? The person who has the money, the other one is Motzi Mechavera Olavaraya. I think one of you asked that question. What do you mean? He's holding $100. Let someone prove that it's his $100. Why is the onus on the one holding the money? The onus should be on the one who wants to get the money. And we have a famous klala Motzi Mechavera Olavaraya. Why don't we say in this case that the person has to prove that he was the one from whom the money was stolen, or that his father was the one who gave the pekudin. That would be logical to say, you know what? You're coming to me and telling me that. Let me go back into the books. Maybe my father has it in his books that he gave a pekudin to Ruvain, and then I'll know it's my father's. And that's the klal, right? Ukem Mamona Becheskes Mari. Says the Gemara here, Alma Misfeka, lower Rin and Ukem Mamona Becheskes Mari. It seems that from Suffolk, we don't say that. Rather, we put the onus on the individual, and he has to pay. That's the Gemara's. The Gemara says right at the beginning, I'm giving you a klal. Ukem Mamona Becheskes Mari. No, we don't hold of that klal here. And that's kind of opposite to what the Gemara teaches us, because the Gemara teaches us that in most cases, the guy who has the money, right? Mike makes right. I mean, you got the money, you're in control. You want it from me? Prove it. And that's the standard. Okay, so the Gemara makes that statement. Now we're going to go weiter. Veramino, and not only is that the statement, but that statement is wrong. Why? And then he quotes the Mishnah. Listen to the So right away, the Gemara is saying the Mishnah is a stira, because in the first part of the Mishnah, where it should be that the fellow should be holding the money and let the others come to him, we say no. But yet in the second case of the Mishnah, that's exactly what we say. We say that the fellow holds the money. So in other words, we're articulating the kasha. The Mishnah is a stira. It gives us a first case where we don't say uka mamona becheskes mare, and a second case where we do say uka mamona becheskes mare, because that shomer who's holding the money, he has it in his pocket. He's not giving out a cent until you two figure it out, and then I'll give you money. Whereas in the first case, he's not waiting for them to figure it out. He's giving him money. So again, the chayra, there's a stira in the Mishnah, right? I mean, again, we're breaking it up to pieces now. And we're saying that in the Mishnah, there's one case where we don't say uka mamone, and then there's a second case. And the kasha is veramina. I'll ask you a kasha, why are the two cases different? Okay, we've already given answers, but why are the two cases different? One where he is uka mamone, and one where he's not uka mamone. So that, okay. So then now we're going to go back to Yale's kasha, which was the very first question, Omale. So the response to that kasha was, Pikotin agazel karamis. You're going to compare Pikotin to a gazlan. Gazel, the Ovid is surah. If he stole, he did an iser, konser rabbanan. The rabbanan give him a knas and say, you know what? You're the one who has to figure it out. You have to come up with the proof that you stole from him, and therefore you don't own the other guy, or that his father gave you a pekudin and you don't have to give it to the other guy, because you're the bad guy, not them. So Gazel constantly is a knas. Okay, makes sense. A pekudin, the Ovid is surah. Pekudin, he did nothing wrong. There was no iser here. He was merely the innocent holder of these items. Low konserabam. So that clearly answers the question, Yale, that there is a difference, and therefore you can't compare case 1 and case 2 in the Mishnah. Okay, so we've disposed of that. Now says the Gemara, okay, I get it, but still there's a stira going on here. What's the stira? Verame pikodna pikodn. I'm going to show you that we have a question of a case. Okay, so the first answer is one is a pekudin, one is a gazela, no comparison. Says the Gemara now, but wait a minute, I'll do you one better. I'm going to show you that even pekudin there's a stira. Even gezel there's a stira. Verami pekudin a pekudin, verami gezel a gezel. I'm going to show you that there's a problem even in 2 cases of pekudin with different outcomes and 2 cases of gezel with different outcomes, which is a step beyond what we just said in answering Yale's question of here there's a kanas, here there's no kas. So now let's get into this and see what is the problem? What's he raising? Pikadon, not pikadon. There is a question of pikadon, not pikadon. Okay, diktani resha. Remember, the resha has a two-part, two parts to it. One where he admits to having stolen, and one where he admits to having been a shomer for somebody's father. No gzela, no gzela. He didn't do anything wrong. The question of knas for iser is good enough when he stole. But here he didn't steal, right? What does the ratio of the Mishnah say? Oh, aviv shel echad mikam hifkid lo mana ve'eni yodea ezehu. What's wrong with that? I mean, it's an innocent mistake. Somebody gave me $100, and I don't remember who. Doesn't that smack of the second case of the Mishnah, where there was a pikadon, right? And the Gemara goes on to say, the Ktani ratio of so what's the outcome of that first case? Not with the Gezela portion, with the pikadon portion. He has to give each one $100 because he doesn't remember whose father gave it to him. Viraminu, now is the question, the second case of the Mishnah, Shnaim, Shefkinu, etc. Now we have a clear stira. You can't say there's a stira from a Ganev to a pikadon. Got it. But we answered that. But the first case includes also the case of a pikadon. And we say he's still chayiv. Why should he be chayiv? Right? Ukamamona becheskes more. So in other words, the kasha that we asked is a real kasha on the second part of the Resha, the part of the Resha dealing with pikadon, not with gezela. So now all of a sudden we have a stira in the Mishnah. We have no stira when it comes to stealing. There's knas is knas, pikadon is pikadon. But pikadon and a pikadon, how do you compare two cases of pikadon? One where he has to dig in his pocket and give extra money, and one where he says, no, I'm also a chaver, all right, you got to come to me. You got to tell me who the right person is. I'm not responsible. So the kasha is a gavaldige kasha because we do have a stira in the Mishnah, right? Everybody get that? Because we're now not dealing with knas anymore. Okay. So now the Gemara gives a very interesting answer, and I think someone was asking the question before about how the transaction took place. The Gemara is going to tell us now how that transaction took place. Omar Rava, Resha, the first case, the case about the each of their fathers, one of their fathers gave the money. Nasa kemisha hefkidelo b'shnei krichos. This is now going to require an assumption on our part, and Rashi will explain. It says if he got the money in two separate bundles, the Havale Lemedek. Remember when I talked before about carelessness, about Pshia? This is a case of Pshia, where the shomer, in other words, the fellow who was holding the money, should have known which of the two fathers gave him the money. He should have been eyes open saying, oh, your father gave me the money, or so we're imputing into him a sense of carelessness by not knowing what happened here. So let's see how Rashi explains it, because this is very instrumental to our understanding. Okay, back to Rashi. Misfeka mafke mamona, the ketoni nos lozemon lozemon. The low one meaning kishizet tova v'zeoma eni yodea im lachabrecha uka mamona b'cheskas nishtabe zeh shalom nifsazenim imono yemuna chachiyav aliyah. Okay, so now Resha, the first case, the high gavra hifkid etzlo v'havalei kishnayim. Here, pay attention. This is how Rashi is defining our case. The chad gavra hifkid etzlo. It's as if two people gave him money in two separate bags, in two separate kalim. Klomer zeh shelo b'fnei zeh, not in front of each other. So in the case, this goes to the previous case. But you see what Rashi is doing. Rashi is saying that when two people give money, there are times when you impute that they gave it to you separately, and as a shomer, you have an obligation of knowing who gave you the money. You can't just wipe out your obligation by saying, yeah, you gave me money, I'm holding it, figure it out. No, you have to know. You have to be the one to write down on a star, Reuven gave me 100 and Shimon gave me 200. If not, you're Posheya. And a Shomer Chinam is Chayiv and Pshia. So we can hold him responsible. Everybody's Chayiv and Pshia. But even a Shomer Chinam who's just going to be a pure holder has an obligation of not being careless. And by not writing down who gave him the money, says Rashi, we are saying you're careless. Now, what about the second case? How does that figure in? No, he's sitting there. The two fellows come together. The two guys are friends. They trust each other. They even give it in one bag. The less Medic, he can't investigate who's giving one, who's giving two. He's not investigating what's in the bag. He's taking it at face value. He's giving 100. He's giving 200. Since they did it in front of each other, they're revealing they don't suspect each other. Lomer Shema Chavera Yitva Hamasayim. Maybe my friend is going to say 200 when he really only gave 100. So in other words, two different perspectives. And that's what the Gemara is going to tell us here. Is that you're asking me a kasha and saying it's a kasha from the Reisha to the Seifa, because in the Reisha, one of the fathers gave, and he doesn't know which one. In the Seifa, no, there was the money came together from two separate people. So why is one a motzi mechaver olav araya, essentially, meaning uka mamona becheskes mare, and the other not? The teretz is, Rashi's explaining to us that it's a different mindset. When two people, even though in the case of the fathers, only one father came, right? The other father didn't give him any money. But the fact of the matter is that since he doesn't know, it's as if both of them came together, gave money, he didn't pay attention, and now he's up the creek because he's got $100 and he's got two people timing that he owes him $100. So he has no choice but to give each one $100. In the case of the 200 and 100, they came to me slapping each other on the back, gave me one bag, said in the bag there's $100 for me, 200 for me. It's all good and fine. So what's he supposed to do? And we're going to see that in a minute. The Gemara is going to tell us, does he have to know, does he have to be better than them? They're not worried. Why should I be worried? Why should I worry when they're not worried? So obviously they think that everything is okay. And when it comes to collect, one is going to be honest and say it's 100 and the other will say 200. I'm supposed to know that that's not the case? Of course not. So it's not a stira. The kasha is it's a stira because we see one pikadon, we say ukamamona b'cheskes mare, and one we don't. It's not a stira. In one case, he was clearly negligent. He should have known. He should have known that when the guy gave him the $100, he should have known. It's as if they came separately. They didn't. It's as if they came separately. And when two people come to a bank and each one deposits money, what does the teller do? He writes down, Reuven gave me 100, or the second teller is like, Reuven gave me 100. Later on, he knows what to do. But I guess in the banks of old, if two people came in with a bag of money, the teller didn't open the bag and say, oh, which of you is 100? Which of you is 200? You gave me a bag of money, this 300. Okay, I'm writing down 300. Now you're coming back and saying, I gave you 200, but that wasn't part of the deal. You didn't delineate yourself, Reuven, that you were the 200 and that Shimon was the 100. You gave me $300. So you're going to expect Levi, who is holding the money, to know more than them? No, that the Mishnah says we don't do. Therefore, it's not a stira anymore, because they're two separate circumstances. That's what Rashi wants to impart here. There are two separate cases. One where they gave it lump sum together and no one paid attention, and one where he should have paid attention. So Rashi says in the case where he should have paid attention, basically he has to pay each one $100. But in the case where he was not responsible to pay attention, which is the second case, Nasa Kamishif Gidalo Bekrach Echad, the first of the wide lines. Sefer Nasa Kamishif Gidalo Bekrach Echad, Delo Habalela Medek. He doesn't have to investigate. They came at one time together. The Omra Lahu Ant Gufeichel of Kaftisa. You yourselves are not makbid. Ana Kapidna. I should be makbid. You're not makbid to write down on a piece of paper, Reuven 200, Shimon 100. You want me to do that? No, I don't do that. So now we have a teretz as to why it's not a stira, pikadon a pikadon, because there's a difference in the case of the pikadon of the ratio with the gzela or with the father, and the seifa where one gave 200, one 100. Okay, so we've answered that kasha. And now let's go Balavita. Barame Gazel Gazel, but yet the Gemara says, but there's going to be a stira in this Mishnah between Gezel and Gezel. What's the stira? Right, that's our Mishnah. Our ratio of our Mishnah says by Gezel, you're responsible. You should have known who was the individual. Veraminu, now is a kasha. What's the kasha? Not from here. There's a kasha from a Gemara, a Mishnah in Yavamas. What's the kasha? Gezel echad mechamisha. If he still not one of two, the Mishnah there speaks about a different case. There were 5 guys hanging around, and he came and he says, Gezel echad mechamisha. I stole from one of you 5. But I don't know which one of you I stole from. Each one says you stole from me. Says the Mishnah there. He puts the gezel, the $100 on the table, and he backs off, right? And he says, guys, figure it out. Divrei Rab Tarfon. So Rab Tarfon is taking the position that he clearly only stole 100. We're not going to make him pay 500. We're going to say, here's the 100. That there is no more than 100 at stake. You guys figure it out. Who did I steal from? I don't know who I stole from. Okay, Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara doesn't say it here, but Rabbi Akiva argues, and Rabbi Akiva says you got to pay 500. You got to pay each one 100. We'll see how that's material. But right now, it's quoting Rab Tarfon. So what do we see? Alma misfeka lo mifkina mamona. From Suffolk, we don't take his money. You just said in our Mishnah, in the case of someone who stole from 2 people, right? And we don't know from which one, he has to pay 200. There's a Beferish Mishnah there in Yavamas. If he stole from 5 people, according to Rab Tarfon, we hold like Rab Tarfon, he doesn't have to pay 500, he only has to pay 100. So the Chayra, it's a stira, Gezela a Gezela, from this Mishnah to that Mishnah. From the Mishnah here that says they have to pay, to the Mishnah in Yavamas, where we say we don't have to pay. So that's the Gemara's kasha here, that we see that there is a stira. Correct the Gemara right away. How do you know it's Rab Tarfon? You're assuming it's Rab Tarfon, and therefore he has to just put the money on the table and say sufficient. How do you know that? Maybe the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, that he has to pay to every single one. That's the Gemara's kasha. Right? So he says, you know why? Because there's a brisa on this Mishnah, the Ketani Allah, the Hahu Moder Rab Tarfon, that Rab Tarfon is Moder, but Amol Shnaim, Gazalti Lechem Mekem Mana, Ben Yedei is a Mekem Shenos Lezemana. You know how I know that? Because there's a brisa that says it. There's a different Mishnah, the Mishnah, And then the Brisa quotes our Gemara here, where he stole from one of the two, and it says you have to give each one a money. So don't go telling me that what Tarfon says you could just put the money down and all five of them have to figure it out. That's not the case. The Brisa there says that he has to pay each one, and if he has to pay each one, so now it's a stira. Why in our Mishnah do we say that Reb Tarfon admits that you have to pay to each one? And there in that Mishnah in Yevamis, he says, put the money down and let the five guys figure it out. So again, it's a kasha on our Mishnah. Again, what the Gemara is trying to do here is trying to sort of reconcile the problem. What do we say? Do we say Ukam Mamona B'Cheskes More, or don't we say Ukam Mamona B'Cheskes More? So we thought, yeah, according to Reb Tarfon, we passed on to Reb Tarfon, Ukam Mamona B'Cheskes More. It's not that simple, because Reb Tarfon does say, says the Brisa, that he does have to pay the extra. So we're still trying to figure out what's the right answer, whether or not there's a stira between this Mishnah and the Mishnah in Yevamis. Now, there's a secondary kasha here, which we're not going to address right now, but that's the stira in Reb Tarfon himself, right? Because if you look at it, the Mishnah quotes Reb Tarfon saying he only has to put the money down and they can figure it, and the Brisa says he's got to pay each one. Which one is right? It's a stira between the Mishnah and the Brisa in Reb Tarfon, separate kasha, not our problem right now. But you do see that there's two views in Reb Tarfon which are diametrically opposed. Either you hold like the Mishnah and he doesn't have to pay each one, or you hold like the Brisa and he does. But okay, so we'll address that maybe later. But for our purposes now, we see that Reb Tarfon says in the Mishnah he doesn't have to pay everybody. So that's a kasha, because our Mishnah says you do have to pay everybody. How do you reconcile the two Mishnahs? Because remember, it's better to discuss a machlokes between two Mishnahs rather than a Mishnah and a Brisa. Now, a Brisa is also from Tanoim, but it's like a hair below the Mishnah. So if we're really trying to understand a machlokes, it should be Mishnah to Mishnah, not Mishnah to Brisa.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I missed it. But if you steal, there's a penalty as well as paying back, right?
Right.
So why would he just be paying back 100? Why wouldn't he be paying back the additional penalty?
Because he admitted. The
So
halacha.
if you admit you stole, you don't pay a
You don't
penalty?
pay kefil, correct. You only pay kefil when you're found out and we prosecute you. But here he's admitting. He said, I stole, I just don't remember from whom. In other words, I mean, the real issue here is that he wants to do right. When someone wants to do right, we don't heap on a penalty of kefil. Kefil
Okay.
only happens when we chase you and catch you, then we penalize you. Right? Anyway,
Rabbi, and I'm sorry to interrupt because I know we're coming towards the end, but
Yeah.
I understand the concept that we look at a stira Mishnah to Mishnah versus a Mishnah and a Brisa.
correct.
But in this case, the stira of Mishnah to Mishnah is predicated on our understanding of Rabbi Tarfon. And
Right.
if there's a machlokus in how to read Rabbi Tarfon, don't we need to resolve that first to make sure that we understand how he holds in the Mishnah? In other words, we're not yet on solid grounds with Rabbi Tarfon because we're not sure exactly how he holds.
Correct. So you're 100% right. So in this Gemara, as a Tanoim, we're probably sitting around with their insight. They're saying we have a problem with Rav Tarfon because Rav Tarfon. Remember, a Brisa comes from a different perspective, a little bit of a different perspective than a Mishnah.
Mm-hmm.
So they probably were saying we have a problem with Rav Tarfon, like you just said. But nevertheless, in the Mishnah, he clearly says you don't pay.
Okay.
So I agree with you. We do have to reconcile Reb Tarfon. It's just that we're going to do that somewhere else. We're going to reconcile Reb Tarfon somewhere else. Right now,
Thank you.
Right now, in the course of the Mishnah, we know what he says. He argues on Rabbi Akiva. So then it's a stira to our Mishnah because our Mishnah says different than what Tarfon says in the Mishnah. So you're right, but again, sometimes the Gemara has to sort of bifurcate it and say, let's deal with this problem now, and then we're going to deal with the stira in Reb Tarfon later. But you're right, it's hanging out there that there is a stira in Rotarfin. But for our purposes, we're going to say no. So now, so we have to give a teretz. So what's the answer? So now the answer is, Yale, back to your very first statement. Then you know what the difference is? When these 5 people are toveya, they're coming after him and they're going to court and they're saying to the court, he owes us $100, and 5 people say he owes $100. He's coming to fulfill heaven. What does that mean? Deka nami, a proof that he's coming to fulfill heaven. So now let's go back to the Rashi, the first Rashi of the Mishnah. Shahoda b'fi atzma, hoel v'hoda b'fi atzmo. He admitted by himself. Uba Gemara mafarish tama mahu. What's the reason? The reason is because he wants to make it right with Shemayim. When a person wants to make it right with Shemayim, then we tell him, you know what? Do the right thing. Don't cut corners. If you want to make sure that in Shemayim you are not guilty, give each one $100. That's the only way to be a Yireh Shemayim. But when I'm not doing that, and I've got guys standing at the courthouse steps, and each one says, you owe me money, and I say, I don't owe you money, or I may owe you money, I'm not sure. Misafek. He doesn't deny that he owes $100. He just denies that he doesn't owe everybody $100. So think of it this way. 5 people come to court. I mean, again, we know enough, even as laymen, that when 5 people come to court and each one says, I owe you $100, or you owe me $100, and he comes up on the stand and says, Your Honor, I owe $100. I don't owe $500. So to you, number one, I don't know. It's a suffix. To you, number 2, it's a suffix, etc., etc. So from a suffix, you can't collect. He has 5 sfakis. In reality, there's $100 owed, but there's 5 sfakis, 5 doubts as to who he owes that $100. You can't collect a nickel because each one will say, in each case, he'll say, you want money from me? Prove it. Prove that I gave it to you. If you can prove it, I'm happy to give it to you, but I don't know. And misafik, we don't take the money. All he has to do is swear, I don't know. And in reality, he doesn't know. So it's not bracha levatala, it's not a shvur l'shav, because he doesn't know. So the Gemara's answer here is, you know why it's not a stira? Because in one case, you have 5 people coming to court to taina, and he can only say, I don't owe you, or maybe I owe you, maybe I don't owe you. And that's enough of an answer. But in the case of our Mishnah, he is coming to them and saying, I owe you. And so the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, if you really want to pay up, pay each one of them, and then you'll be cleared in the heavenly ledger. And he says, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay up. So
Rabbi?
Rabbi, why wouldn't they
Michael.
make each of the recipients, potential recipients who allege that he owes them, take a shvua that he does owe?
Yes, that was my question.
Right.
Thank you, Michael.
Hold on. So they're swearing yes, and he's saying he's not being moide. Remember what we said, that if you come to me, I owe you $100, and I say, I don't think I owe you $100, you can't collect from me. The only way you can collect from me is if I agree with you. The Torah doesn't allow someone to just walk in and say, you owe me $100, pay me. I mean, that never happens. You have to either admit and say, I owe you $100, right? Or make a shvua. What is a shvua? A shvua is, I'm not sure. In other words, you're right, Michael. If he were to admit that he owes $100, case closed. But just on his saying, I owe you, the other person either has to admit it, right? And pay or make a shvua. And he says, I don't know. Once he says, I don't know, then the fact that you know and he doesn't know doesn't mean you can collect from him. And that's the case with each of the 5. Each of the 5 will, well, I mean, the chayra, one of them is, or 4 are lying, but each one will come in and say, I know that you owe me $100. And he'll say, maybe I do, maybe I don't.
But Rabbi,
so I'm saying-
go ahead. No, Michael, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. So
No,
I'm
no, go ahead.
saying that, it's gotten to that point. He's trying to make it right with Shemayim. He's going out and 5 people allege that he owes.
No, let me stop you. In this case, he's not trying to make it right with Shemayim. The case of the 5 he's not trying to make it right with Shemayim. He's trying to answer a lawsuit. Our Mishnah, he's trying to make it right with Shemayim. So he approaches the 2 and says, I know I stole from one of you, or one of your fathers gave me money, so that you know what we tell him? You want to be a good guy and make it right with Shemayim? Pay them. The second case of the 5 people, he's not looking to make it right with Shemayim. He knows he owes 100. He doesn't know to whom, so he's not going to take 500 out of his pocket and pay $500 when he knows with certainty that he only owes 100. So Shemayim doesn't come into it. Shemayim does not come into it in the second case. It's simply a case of I come and say you owe me 100, and I answer you maybe I owe you. I'm not saying I do or I don't, but I'm not a bari. So we tell him make a shvua and don't pay, and that's what happens to each of the 5. So in other words, the answer is there are 2 separate types of cases. One where he's looking to make it right with Shemayim, the onus is on him to pay. Where he's not looking to make it right with Shemayim because he knows he didn't take $500. He knows that it was only $100 that was given to him. All he's trying to do is figure out which one. Says the Gemara, in that particular case, he can deny each one of them, even though one of them will be not a correct denial, but he's allowed to deny each one separately because in each case there is a suffix. And misafek you don't collect. You don't collect misafek. So what's he doing wrong here? Well, what he's doing wrong is he's denying 5 people in 5 separate cases. And in real life, if I come to you and I want $100 and say I gave you $100, then it has nothing to do with Yale's case of $100 or David's case of $100. Those are different cases. So in each case, I'm a defendant and I have to say, I don't know that I owe you money. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. And be suffic, we don't take money. So the teretz is, it's not a kasha of gezela on gezela or pikadon not pikadon, because there are different cases. That one is the initiative is from the ganef, and he wants to make it right. When the initiative is from the ganef, then we say you got to walk the extra mile, pay the extra 100, even though you know you didn't take another 100. But how else will you make it right in Shemayim, right? Because remember, the whole principle of Yavushel Eliyahu is really hurting somebody, because somebody's money is going to be sit there till Yavushel Eliyahu when it should be in his pocket. And Rashi talks about that. You're really taking money out of his pocket by saying Yavushel Eliyahu, because it really should be his money to use. But because of the confusion, he's being stuck. He's being stuck that $100 of his money he'll never see till Eliyahu comes. But in the
Okay, but Rabbi, I'm sorry, you mentioned, you kind of had a throwaway line in there, but this is what's been bothering me. Unless we think that all 5 people truly thought they had $100 in their pocket and now they're missing it, you've got 4 people who are lying.
correct,
4 of the 5 are actually lying.
right.
How does that factor in? Because you know for a fact that 4 of the 5 people are lying. So yes, the Ganef was wrong for taking $100 from somebody, but you've got 4 people who are lying in this transaction on the other side as well.
And those 4 people don't care to make it right with Shemayim.
And you don't make them swear. The
And you don't
Shiur
make them swear.
is that you didn't do something. You don't make 5 people swear that they are owed something when 4 of them are not going to be telling the truth.
Right.
Because you don't want to have 4 shvuas shavs. You don't have
In other words, and we learned this in the Gemara in the past, that when you know someone's going to lie, because we know 4 of those people are going to lie, we don't
make
want
them
to
swear
put them in a matzah where they're going to lie, right? The Gemara told us that we never want to put those people in a matzah, even though we're protecting their interests and they don't care, but we care. We care enough that we don't want to force them to lie, right? So we can't make it happen. And again, the focus here is always on the one who's holding the money, not the people who are being Toveya. So, but that's an aside point. But you're correct in asking that, Yale, because 4 people are not telling the truth, or 4 people are confused and they think that they gave him the $100. Maybe they gave it to somebody else. Let's just put them on Chesus Kashrus that they did give somebody money and they think it's Reuven. Maybe it was Yehuda. Maybe it was somebody else. So, so in the greater picture, the Gemara is telling us there's one person who wants to make it good, and that's the holder of the Pikadon. If you want to make it good, you got to do something that is going to be painful. You got to pay each one $100. You don't owe 200, but that's the only way to make it right with Shemayim. But the case of the 5, where clearly only one person gave him the $100, and he's sitting there and he's saying, you want me to pay $500 to 5 people when there's no question in anybody's mind that there's only $100 at stake here? That I'm not doing. I'm not going to pay $500 to 5 people when all I owe is 100 to one person. So we do, and today, by the way, right, Yale, we have an interpleader. In other words, the poor guy is holding the $100 and he goes to the court and says, court, I owe $100, no question about it. Here it is. Now figure it out. Right. Figure it out. Don't make me figure it out. You figure it out.
That's
Rabbi
Tarfon.
telling us.
That's Rabbi Tarfon, right? That's
When
Rabbi Tarfon. That's Rabbi Tarfon's position.
And that's
Right,
what
that's what it sounds like. He says, put the money down on the table, and you guys figure it out. Isn't that like an interpleader? In other words, I'm washing my hands of it. Here's
that's exactly what an interpleader is. And that's what Rabbi Tarfon says. Rabbi Akiva is more machmir, and he says, no, I'm not, you can't do that. You have to deal with all. In other words, do you deal with each one of them separately, or do you deal with them together? Tarfon says, I'll deal with each one separately. Maybe I owe you, maybe I don't. 5 times. Rabbi Akiva says, wait a minute, I owe $100. I just don't know to whom, but I do owe $100. So he's lumping them all together, and that's the chiluk between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. But nevertheless, to answer our Gemara, because our Gemara says, oh, it's a stira between Pikadon and Pikadon. Tarot says, no steeras, there's no more steeras, because each case stands on its own, legs, and each case is different. Gezel is different. Pikadon is different. So this whole Gemara that we discuss here was sort of a roundabout way for us to understand 2 things. Number one, that there's a major difference, and Rashi says it at the very beginning, between if I come to you and say I owe you money, or you come to me and say you owe me money. Big difference. If I come to you and you want to do the right thing, hey, if you come to me and say I owe that you owe me money, wait a minute, not so fast. That's one major difference. Okay, we got that. The other difference is that in cases of an individual doing something, or in other words, being the initiator, or forget about whether it's lishma or not. The difference between an individual being an initiator or someone coming to Taina, then there's a different perspective in that person's mind as to whether or not he has a chayis, because we see that in the case of 5 people who come after him, he's not denying that he doesn't owe 100. He's just denying that I owe it to you, or to you, or to you. So you got to help me figure out who I owe it to. So says Rav Tarfon, put the money down and we'll figure it out. Rabbi Akiva says, no, we don't go by that. But the machlokes Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva is a side machlokes, and we see there's a steer in Rav Tarfon too, which we discussed, and we have to maybe address that later. But nevertheless, the end result is that there are no longer steers in our Mishnah or from our Mishnah to that other case in Yevamis, because they all deal with slightly different nuanced issues, and you can't compare one to the other. So that's the maskana of the Gemara, and the Gemara proves it by saying Dekanami at the very end. Shmamina. So we see. So that ends that discussion. The Gemara next week will go a little bit off on a tangent, but nevertheless, we've now reconciled the entire Mishnah by saying there's no more steerus in the Mishnah. Of course, Rabbi Akiva is Lishitaso, Rabbi Tarfon is Lishitaso, but that's for another day. And at the Gemara in Yevamis there, or the Brisa, Mitchum will hopefully get to Yevamis, will help us understand that stira between the Mishnah and the Brisa. But it's not a question for us to address here. So, Mr. Chairman.
Rabbi.
Yeah,
Thanks, Rabbi. Go ahead.
So
Rabbi,
Ju-
just
a
one
situ-
question before.
ahead.
If, I would think that the most logical way of resolving the whole problem is where he just drops it in the middle and says to the other four, you guys figure it out. The reason is, I believe that the four, since they're all lying, think that he's a patsy and they're going to make something out of him. Whereas within themselves, if they know they're not going to, if one of them is lying, it's going to come out within the four because they're all four of the same type of people.
Right,
So,
but David,
you know,
let
a
me
thief
introduce
knows a
something
thief.
that I haven't said, but Yale will understand this as well, because I mean, if you practice law and you look at it from objectively, is there not a difference between 5 lawsuits from 5 people about $100 or a consolidated lawsuit of 5 people against one person for $100? In other words, if you have 5 people all signing the same 100, and the person who they're pursuing says, I want each of those cases to be tried separately. So in each of the cases, he can say, maybe I owe, maybe I don't. He can create the suffix. If you consolidate the 5 cases and 5 people file one lawsuit against the person, what's he going to say? He's going to say, I admit that I owe 100, but I don't owe 500. So you see that his teretz is different in a consolidated case than it is in 5 separate cases. Our Gemara is telling us that each person is separately suing him. When each person is separately suing him for the $100, his answer is, I don't know that I owe you. I can't pay you on a suffix. I can't pay you on a suffix. I don't know if I owe you. I may actually owe you, but I don't know that.
Oh, so in other words, the hypothesis of this is that the person that's holding the money is lying.
No, the person who's holding the money is not lying. He's saying, I'm not sure that I owe you the money. He's not
Right,
saying I
he's
don't.
admitting that he owes the $100.
Right,
but
but
he
he's
just
not saying that
doesn't
I
know
owe
who
it
the
to
5
you individual.
Well, then he's more honest and reliable because he's afraid of Hashem. Apparently the others think they're going to, out of sight, out of mind, I can get away with it. I'm not.
No. But in the case of the 5, he has Hashem isn't involved. He's not trying to make it right with God by saying that I owe the $100. That's when he comes forth and admits on his own, I owe you. We say, if you've come forward and say that you owe money, then do the right thing and pay everybody. Here he has no hava minute to do right by God because he's not thinking he did anything wrong. He knows that somebody gave him money. He just
No, I
doesn't
didn't
know
mean him.
who.
I didn't mean him being afraid of Hashem. I'm talking about the
No,
other four.
okay. So you can impute that. I mean, I'm not going to argue and say that he's not afraid. But at the end of the day, misafek, from a doubt, we don't collect. You don't collect money from a doubt, even though Yale knows that he's the guy who gave him the money, and he says, I gave him the money 100%, and I say, that's what you say. I don't know. In other words, and then David comes and says, oh, no, I gave you the money. And you say, I don't know. So someone's lying. If everybody says with certainty, I gave you the money, clearly 4 people are lying. But from his perspective, he doesn't have to pay any of them because in each case, it's a suffix. And from a suffix, you don't collect money from him. So he has the protection of being a suffix. Yes, Scott.
Okay, so I owned Ben Yehuda, and I had a pizza guy passed away. And so I owed $250, something along that line, for his work, but he's passed away. So his wife calls me up, his ex-wife, says, I'd like to collect his paycheck. I says, yeah, not a problem. We'll work it out. Just come on down. And then a couple hours later, his brother called up and says, no, his wife shouldn't get the paycheck. I need the paycheck. I'm his next of kin. And then it wasn't a couple hours later, then his girlfriend called up and says, no, he lives with me and I want the money. And so I said, look, I owe the money and I'm going to put it aside and I don't, I want to pay it. It's not my money, but you need to come up with some kind of legal document saying that you're entitled. And the brother comes back and says to me, he says, you Jews are all alike. I said, no, I says, you come here. He says, I can't afford a lawyer for $250. I says, well, just go down to the county. They'll fix you up and it's not going to cost you a cent. But I'm not giving out any money until I
No,
see.
but your case is exactly what we're talking about here, where more than one person has a taina for the same money. You know you owe that amount of money, but
Yeah.
you're stuck in the middle of who you give it to. And by the way, from a legal standpoint, meaning secular legal law, you got to be very, very careful, because if you pay the wrong guy, you still may be liable to the right guy.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you're not doing anything wrong other than saying, I admit that I owe it.